Happy Mommy's Day. Today's scripture is James 1 through 5. James, a servant of God and the Lord of Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, when you ever face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him.
Thank you, Ty. Good morning. We have several guests today, and we're glad that you're with us. And we have also several people gone, and I'm sure they're somewhere else visiting their parents, just like some of you are here visiting your parents, and I appreciate that. Go ahead and turn your Bibles to Judges 13, Judges chapter 13. I want to mention again the Midwest lectureship. Tuesday is the last day to sign up and get early registration fee discount, and so I encourage you that. It's in October, but that seems like a long way away, but you have to get in and get your registration in order to get the discount on the registration. And I'd also remind you that next Sunday is our blood drive, and there's also going to be a shower in the afternoon for the Johnson baby, and Melissa is featured in both of those, since it's her baby, and it's also her blood drive, or she's leading the blood drive. So I encourage you to plug in and be a part of that, and there's a sign-up sheet out on the information desk. Why don't you stand up and greet somebody near you? One of the funnier movies that came out a few years ago, hit the big screen, was Mr. Mom. And my older children probably saw it at least a dozen times. My daughters enjoyed it a whole lot more than I did, although I enjoyed the movie. It was pretty much of a chick flick, but it was a funny chick flick. The plot musters its humor at the expense of the poor, ignorant, naive dad who was unable to get a job. He lost his job from the automobile plant in Detroit. He was an engineer. He thought he could get a job just right off again, and he couldn't. And so his wife decided she'd put in an application a few places, and she got a job pretty quickly. And so he decided he would stay home and take care of the kids while she went to work and brought home the bacon. And of course, it was not nearly as easy a task as he had imagined it was to be the stay-at-home mom. And in fact, it was an absolute disaster. And that's where all of the laughs came from, of course, at the expense of Dad. I guess in a kind of a comic relief sort of way, that movie said pretty much what Ann Jarvis was trying to say when she almost single-handedly thrust Mother's Day onto the American calendar and into American hearts more than a century ago. It was May 1908 at a Methodist church in Grafton, West Virginia, when Mother's Day was begun. And I have been to Grafton, West Virginia, and I have been to that church where that all started. It was an attempt to honor mothers, and it was not either domestication nor was it self-serving as goal, because Ann Jarvis was not married, and she certainly was not a mother. But she did grasp the enormity of the task, and she wanted to honor those individuals who took on that task, and so Mother's Day was begun in 1908. It was only a couple years after that it was officially recognized as a national holiday by the president. The movie Mr. Mom also attempted to say that being a mother is a big job. And of course, many of us know that already, although I'm sure there's still some who feel like it's a cakewalk. But those who feel that way probably haven't tried it themselves. Being a parent, period, is a big job. It's a rather major challenge, especially if you take the job seriously and do the job right. Some find it out the hard way. They assume that it's all going to come naturally. It's just going to happen. It's just going to be natural. And it's not until they reach a point of frustration or crisis that they realize that they need some help. And the readiness for parenthood is not quite there. In fact, the reality of parenthood crashes down upon them suddenly with a major force, and they feel overwhelmed. In fact, the awesomeness of the responsibility is almost overwhelming. Some do recognize going into the task of parenting that it's a big job. And so they begin the process by doing research and seeking resources, by gathering unto themselves mentors, and by asking for guidance so that they might do the job well. And such was the case of Manoah and his wife when they learned that they were going to be parents of a bouncing baby boy. And that's what our text is about. It's linked to a very familiar character. That bouncing baby boy was Samson. And so we come to read in Judges 13. As I start, let me remind you that Judges is an interesting book. It has probably more military action than any other book in the Bible. But there's a cycle that appears over and over again. God's people are blessed and they're happy, and they just kind of live in just the comfort of the day, and they gradually kind of become complacent, and then they kind of wander away from God and eventually rebel against Him. And so God allows them to be conquered by one of their neighbors, and they're under oppression, and they recognize they need God. And so they cry out to Him, and He has compassion on them, and He rescues them. And this happens over and over and over in Judges, and that's where we're at as we begin this text. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them to the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was sterile and remained childless. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are sterile and childless, but you are going to conceive and have a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, that you do not eat anything unclean, because you will conceive and give birth to a son. No razors to be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Wright, set apart to God from birth, and he will begin deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines." Then the woman went to her husband and told him, "A man of God came to me. He looked like an angel of God, very awesome. I didn't ask him where he came from, and he didn't tell me his name. But he said to me, 'You will conceive and give birth to a son. And now then, don't drink no wine or other fermented drink, and do not eat anything unclean, because the boy will be a Nazirite of God from birth until the day of his death.' Then Manoah prayed to the Lord, 'Oh Lord, I beg you, let the man of God you sent to us come again and teach us how to bring up the boy who is to be born.' God heard Manoah, and the angel of the Lord came again to the woman while she was out in the field, but her husband Manoah was not with her." I want you to first of all notice that they asked God for guidance and got it. Now that's consistent with what we read quite a number of times in Scripture, and we find it in James. James tells us that wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. And the text that Ty read a few minutes ago, we find James says that if any of you lack wisdom, he should ask God, and God gives to him generously, to all without finding fault, and it will be given to him. So Manoah asked, and God answered. He asked for wisdom, and God gave it. And the same thing's true today. If we want wisdom, we ask God for it. I know a lot of parents, and probably you do too, have been brought to their knees by the task of parenting. They reach a point where they don't know what to do. They said, what do I do? I don't know what to do. They feel like they're at their wits' end. Almost always, it's a crisis that causes them to reach such a drastic point that they go to their knees and pray about it. A painful few start out their parenting adventure on their knees, like Manoah and his wife. Most of us, it seems, are confident, maybe even cocksure in the beginning. Let me ask you, you don't have to respond, but I want you to respond inside. How many in this room, I wonder, started out by saying, I'm not going to make the mistakes my parents made. I'm going to have plenty of time for my children. I'm going to be the right kind of parent, the perfect parent. I'm never going to be too tired to be interested in what they're interested in. I'm never going to be guilty of playing favorites. I'm always going to be ready to hear their side of the story when there's a difference or a problem. We start out the task very confident that we can do it, even that it's going to come naturally to us. Well, Manoah and his wife were not quite so confident of their natural parenting aptitude. And so they petitioned God. Oh, Lord, I beg you, let the man of God that you sent to us come again and teach us how to bring up this boy who is born. Very few of us demonstrate that kind of urgency until crisis arises. But they had that urgency when they learned they were going to have a son. I also want you to notice that the primary contact person was the child's mother. Both the initial announcement and the return for instruction came to the woman. Now, it was Manoah that prayed the prayer, but the angel returned to the woman. Manoah is included only as a guest of the woman. First, by report, and then by invitation. Isn't that interesting? And this happened in a heavily patriarchal society. Now, why do you suppose that was true? Well, we're not told. But very probably it was that way because she was going to be the primary one that stood between this infant being born and his manhood. She would be the one to nurse him. She would be the one to nurture him. She would be the one to teach him the early lessons of life that he would need to learn. She was going to be the one that made the difference of the kind of man he became. Manoah would be included, but by report and perhaps by invitation. Now, our world is quite different from that one. We're no longer either a nomadic people nor an agrarian people. And neither are we patriarchal, except in a very limited sense. Typically, mothers today come in all kinds of varieties. They're career mothers who go to work every day and they're on a career path. Maybe have great goals about their career, but at the same time, they're a mother. And then there are working mothers that are not on a career path, but but they feel like they have to hold down a job in order to help keep the family fed. And so they try to do both. They do job, maybe full-time, maybe part-time, but they're also a mother. And then there are telecommuting mothers who have arranged it so they can work on a computer at home and take care of the kids and be at home with the kids, but at the same time be online and get a job done. That's one of the advantages of the modern world that was not here a generation or two ago. And there are student mothers. Mothers who are working on their degree so that when their children are grown, they can begin a career. But right now they're in school getting that degree. And there are child mothers. Mothers who began their family a little young, maybe too young, maybe before they'd planned. But they're still trying to be a mother, a faithful mother to the child. At the same time, they're trying to grow up themselves. There are single mothers who are trying to be both mom and dad to their kids. And that's never an easy task because of all the stresses that need to be combined. And of course, there are the cookie baking, diaper changing, stay-at-home mothers that we like to think is typical, but is not really all that typical at all. And then, of course, there are also even Mr. Moms, men who are trying to do a mother's job. Maybe because, like that guy, they can't get a job in this depressed economy, but their wife can. And so they have chosen to stay home and be mom to the kids while their mothers bring home the bacon. Or it may be that it's a little more than that. A few years ago at Pepperdine, I was rooming in the dorm, and I usually stayed with a family, friends of mine, but that year I was in the dorm, and the two of my three roommates were John and Ryan. John was 28, Ryan was 5. And I learned as I got acquainted with them that John was Ryan's dad and mom. Right after the son was born, the wife hit the road, never to be seen again. And John was trying his best to be everything to his son. And as I watched him, I was impressed with how seriously he took the job. And they seem to be doing okay. Some of you have pretty much finished your role of parenting, although I'm not sure we ever get done with the role of parenting. Some of you are just getting started at different points along the way, but early in the game. My appeal to you, if you're early in the game, is follow the example of Manoah and his wife. Recognize the enormity of the responsibility on the front end of it. Ask God for direction and on the rearing and the training of your children and how to do that. Ask Him for wisdom. Mothers, include the fathers by report and by invitation. Make sure they're not kept outside the loop, but bring them in. And dads, insist on having a functional role in this task called parenting. Don't just be a parent in name only, but be an active parent in your children's lives. Please realize that the direction of tomorrow is in your hands. Oh yes, to be sure, there all kinds of winds will blow. There will be political winds and social winds and economic winds, and right now we're in the middle of some of those winds. And some of them will be veritable storms. But none of those things will determine the future. Your hand on the rudder is what will determine the future. And that rudder is your child. It's your children and my children and my grandchildren that will be the future of tomorrow. And so the future of tomorrow is literally in your hands. So take the task seriously, because it is an awesome responsibility. And I commend you as we proceed through this very special Mother's Day. You may need initially confess Jesus Christ as your Lord and be buried with Him in baptism. The water's ready. I know Pedro told me that he has a baptism this morning. You may want to linger for that. Today would be a good day to do that. Or it may be you've already done that, but you need to make your heart right with God. You've wandered away, and you need to come back. If it's something private, keep it private. But if it's something you need to have the church involved in, let us know what that need is as we stand and as we sing.